Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast. Ozcast. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
You might like to call because John Quirke is with me, and you might like to talk with him as well. I mentioned to you, where was it? I think I was in the garage doing the Court of Public Opinion on Facebook or podcast. I mentioned to you that I had this wonderful lunch with John, and he had invited various people from both sides of politics, and everyone got on so wonderfully well. Former politicians from different sides of politics. I must admit, John, welcome to the dining room table.
Well, thank you very much, Jeremy.
Thank you for having me at that lunch. That was good fun. I learned a lot. I sat there and listened to some fantastic stories.
Well, there's some great characters there, and in fact, a lot of people get their impression of Parliament from Question Time every day.
Yeah,
which is where it's theatre. And in reality, politics is an interesting exercise in the sense that your mates are opposite and some of your enemies are on your side.
I never thought about that.
They're never going to vote for you, the people opposite, and you're not going to vote for them.
Yeah.
And the people on your side either want what you've got or you want what they've got. And so for about 3.5 years in state parliament anyway, your mates are there and one thing or another, and you're in contact with each other. And then for the last 6 months before the election, you've got to help somebody on your side, someone from outside, knock one of your mates off, opposite, and you've got to do all that. And then on election night, or at the very latest the next morning, you're on the phone to your mate or he's on the phone to you from opposite to find out how you're getting on and what you want for Christmas and all this, that and the other.
So there is a degree of camaraderie that we, the people, don't really see all that often.
Yes, there is. And it's there for probably 3 or 3.5 years of each parliamentary session.
Yes.
And I well remember one case where one fellow opposite, it was Sam Bass, I can mention his name now, he's no longer with us. Sam was very upset that somebody was circulating a pamphlet that was going around, and he wanted a copy from me.
Was he the police minister?
No, he wasn't. He was a backbencher, but he had been famous because he had been at the shootout at the Arkaba, where a drug dealer was shot by Sam. And Sam went on to be the president of the Police Association, or it might have been secretary.
I did associate the name with the police, yeah.
Anyway, Sam did this, and Rand called it Tweezergate. And the police did some fingerprints. And Anyway, I remember one day he came to me and he was quite worried about Question Time. And I said, well, I'll give you the advice that a very wise old man by the name of Frank Blevins gave me years ago. When they're getting at you, just take a copy of the newspaper in, turn the page and just keep reading and don't show any emotion. And when it was finished that day, and I just sent a note over to Sam saying, I'll pick you up at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. We're going shooting up bush. And Graham Gunn and a few of the other people you met the other day were part of that enterprise. So, no, look, it's a human endeavour. And
how long were you there?
I was there for 8 years in state parliament and then in federal parliament for 3 years.
Which one was more fun?
That's a hard question, actually. Federal was a lot harder because there was a lot more days away. It's not only the parliament, but it's also committees you're on.
Yes.
I remember one year being away 178 days. But I suppose the more fun was federally. It seemed more relevant. But I also worked for 4.5 years for a federal senator before I was elected to state parliament. So I spent probably almost 20 years in the system.
Well, you would know where all the bodies are buried. You would be a fantastic lobbyist. I don't know, you probably do that, because if you need something done or something fixed, you ring John Quirke, and he would at least know where to go or where to send you.
Well, you can never get out of it, Jeremy. I mean, I remember when I was a member, I made a thing of being available and being around, and I had a publicly listed telephone number when I was a state member.
That's a good idea.
Oh, and I would get lots of people there. I would have them there, and large numbers of them, and some of them still contact me even today, even though it's been many years since I've been a state member. And there were a number of companies that I have done things for. For instance, next Tuesday, I'm still a guest after many years at the Hotels Association President's Lunch. They had a few issues which I sorted out for them many years ago, and they still remember me.
You know, there's a competition, I suppose you'd call it a competition. I've got it here somewhere, where they decide the best hotels. They literally, I don't exactly know how they work it out, because it would be a little bit difficult comparing hotels, but I'll go looking for it in a minute, because we did extremely well here in South Australia. We won just about everything. And the best hotel in the whole country, here we are, the best hotel in the whole country is the Cremorne Hotel on Unley Road.
That's amazing.
Yeah, look, I'll give you this afterwards, because you'd probably find it interesting. South Australian venues win top honours at the Australian Hotels Association National Awards for Excellence. The Cremorne Hotel won the overall Best Hotel in the Metropolitan category, the most prestigious award of the lot. The Duke of Brunswick Hotel garnered acclaim as the All Abilities Hotel, General Division. The best restaurant, there was the Brompton, SA. The best gambling hotel was Cross Keys Hotel. I mean, somebody must go around there and judge all of these hotels. It wouldn't be a bad kind of job to have, I wouldn't think.
Well, I think it probably would be an excellent job, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Possibly you should apply, mate. So,
No. It would wear me out, and I think that all the hotels that I've ever been to, and there haven't been many, they all have something completely different. And how you can compare, you're not comparing apples with apples.
No, you're not. And I must say, with the hotels, I well remember a terrible phone call I got once from a constituent to tell me that one of their friends, their daughter, had incurable brain cancer. And anyway, the bottom line was that Davina and myself donated a trip for her to go to Sydney with her father. And anyway, the bottom line was that I approached the local hotels and all the rest of it, and they sent the family to the United States.
Brilliant.
For her to go to Disneyland, which was very good because she had less than 6 months left to live.
Yep.
And I found that whenever I had a problem like that, I would approach the hotels, and they did a good job. And when the girl died, because her family had no money, I rang up the local hotelier, another one, a different one, who was a good friend of mine who was quite prominent with the Hotels Association. And he came round, and I said to him, can we do some sort of community function to get the money for the funeral? And he said, I'm too busy. How much is it?
Yeah. You see, it strikes me that you're the old-fashioned politician. And I don't sort of see that connection with people that you obviously still have. I don't see that in the politicians of today. What do you think of the present crop of politicians on both sides?
Well, Jeremy, I think there are some that are close to their community. There's some that have come out of the community. There are some that had the best interests of the community at heart. Yeah. And the sort of stories I've just told you a minute ago were things that would never have been published, would never have said. No. I didn't mention the...
But people would know about it, and
I didn't mention the particular hotelier's name, but Greg Fay is still...
Oh, yes, he's a marvellous character.
A very great friend of mine.
Yes. How many hotels has he got now? He's got dozens, hasn't he?
I'm not sure. His son's involved with a few of them. Of course, You're talking, in my case, to me, I'm a teetotaler. And so, as I used to say to the hotels, unfortunately, you're not going to make much out of me and Diet Coke. But, I think, in answer to your question, there are some politicians that are close to the community. There are some that need to be. But I must say, when I moved to the Senate, I expected to see the same volume of constituents, because now I represent South Australia together with 11 other senators. And I had been a member of the lower house of 47 members. And I saw more people in my lower house seat on a Friday morning for what we used to call surgery. I'd seen more people there then than I saw in a whole year when I was in the federal Senate. You would get people who would come to a senator's office very rarely, and nowhere near as often as when you're there. So I suspect the answer to your question is that it depends a lot on who you are and where you are and how much you want to get involved with the local community, the local schools, and a number of things like that.
Are we overgoverned? We've got these 3 different levels of government. We're only 25 million people. Could we do without one of the levels of government?
I think there's no doubt to that. The issue, of course, is, I guess, the opposite angle to that, of course, is that in South Australia, we're a long way from Canberra, and it may well be that for geographic reasons, we need at least some form of local state government of one kind or another. Yeah. The other thing, of course, is that the federal government was created by the states. And so, in essence, the federation came about. It was the child of the states of Australia at that particular time. Yeah. I think one of the worrying things for me and my wife, who is a local councillor, may disagree with this, but we do have a large and growing and mushrooming apparatus called local government in Australia. And I did see recently that there were large pay packets, sometimes well in excess of almost as much as the Prime Minister for some of the council CEOs. And I really do seriously worry about the growth of a bureaucracy while the potholes are still not being fixed.
Yeah, I think that would be a very popular view that you just expressed. Popular, yeah. Talking about the size, I don't know if you've seen this, but the expansion of Australia's federal parliament, they want to expand it to 200 MPs, up from 151. And it says here, a step closer with the backing of a controversial new proposal put forward by politicians. The Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Matters, made up of Labor, Coalition, Greens and Independents, said more MPs and senators are needed to ensure the electoral system is made fairer for every Australian. It goes on to say the concept known as one vote, one value is based on the idea of every MP representing the same number of constituents regardless of where they are. Is there an argument for increasing the size of Parliament to 200?
Well, I don't know it'll ever be a popular argument, but I think the reality of this for South Australia is very important. When the states federated in 1901, not every state was involved. Tasmania and Western Australia would join in the coming years, I think in 2004.
Were they like separate countries?
Well, they didn't want to join in. Again, it was the tyranny of distance in many respects. They thought that joining in there, it was too far remote. At that time, it was based in Melbourne. Canberra didn't exist. But they joined up on the basis that they would always have at least 5 electorates. Now, in Western Australia, the boom came. Western Australia's population is now well in excess of what South Australia's is. And the reason I'm saying this to your listeners is this, that South Australia used to have 13 federal seats. Then it went down to 11. Now it's down to 10. And when the redistribution happens, at some stage further down the field, we'll go down to 9, we'll go down to 8. Tasmania still has 5. Tasmania never populated. And so the number of people in South Australia in an electoral division is the same as that in Queensland and New South Wales and Victoria and the other states, except Tasmania.
Vastly overrepresented.
Tasmania, well, it could well be argued that, but that was the deal they joined the Federation on. So if we don't extend, this is a long-winded thing, but if we do not expand the size of federal parliament, then we will, in South Australia, dwindle down further and further to, I'm not sure at what point somebody will say, well, we have to put a floor underneath this. That's one argument for it, but I don't know that many people out there would see the idea of expanding to 200 a good idea. However, you've got another problem, and that is that Canberra currently now elects, I think it's 2 senators, and they do it at every election rather than every other election, like we do here for a particular cohort of senators. Now, as I understand it, Canberra and the population of the ACT is growing much more so than South Australia.
I've heard that.
Much more so than what you would have anticipated all those years ago when it was created. But the reality of it is that South Australia has 12 senators, as does every other state. Canberra has 2. And as a consequence of that, you may well wind up with the situation that South Australia or Tasmania has 12 senators, whereas in the ACT you have 2 for what will be a growing population, and one day, as I understand it, I think it's around about 2050 or 2060, it's expected the ACT will be a larger population than South Australia. One of your listeners may know more about that, but that's my anticipation.
You paint a picture there that's fairly worrying for South Australians. I mean, I sort of like the smaller city. I like the village feeling that Adelaide gives one. But you don't want to sort of lose your relevance. You don't want to find yourself becoming a backwater, isolated, not considered in various discussions and decisions. We have to remain relevant. Do you see any danger in that being a problem?
Oh, there's very considerable dangers, Jeremy, and you've put
What do we do?
You've put your finger right on it. And one of the examples this week is the Murray-Darling Basin problem, and the fact that in the eastern states they would love to have the water which we require down here.
Yes.
And I'm sure they'd be happy to say, well, go and run your desal plant for a few more weeks of the year, But the reality is that for environmental reasons, for all sorts of things, we need a constant flow of water. Now, last year we got a huge flow of water, but that's unusual. It's only happened about 4 or 5 times in my lifetime that the river has actually flushed itself out.
And we need that for the mouth of the Murray, don't we?
We need it for the mouth of the Murray. We need it for the health of the Murray. I well remember sitting on parliamentary committees where we brought in salt interception schemes. What a lot of people don't realise is that our continent was submerged underwater for many millions of years, and there are large deposits of salt that's not that far under the surface. And as a consequence of that, we have to bring in schemes to intercept that salt from getting into the River Murray. And so there are a number of salt interception schemes that stop that. And the other way of dealing with it is one that nature deals with, or God, if you believe in God. Every now and again there is a good flush of rain, like last year, which will flush out the River Murray. And so getting back to your central point, unfortunately in South Australia we have diminishing number of people in Canberra. We have diminishing influences. And so it is an issue, and it is an argument for an expansion of the lower house, as indeed for Canberra or the ACT, there is an argument for them to at least have the same number of senators as Tasmania, which has a similar population.
Yeah. Are we well governed?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I have mixed opinions about that, but to be honest with you, you look every now and again and you wonder how certain things could happen. I think in respect of our democracy, it's something that we should cherish. I think it is good that we have it that way. And as I think Winston Churchill said once, that democracy is the worst form of government except for every other kind.
And I heard him, I don't know whether it's sort of a distortion of that, which I like better than mine, and that is that democracy is not very good, but it'll have to do till something better comes along. But I like yours. What was yours again?
Well, it was Winston Churchill. I'm pinching it from him. He said that democracy is the worst form of government except for every other kind. And, you know, you look at it, you look particularly at the United States now, and the polarity between a resurgent Donald Trump and President Biden, who I think does have some issues. They may be exaggerated, I don't know. But you think 336 million people in the United States, 200 million voters, how could you wind up with a system with a polarity like that? But unfortunately, you look at the other side and you see some of the great presidents of the United States that have been produced, like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who is one of my great heroes. And on the other side, in the Republican side, I think Ronald Reagan did a great job.
Yeah. Henry Kissinger, we were talking about him earlier. As you know, gone to God at 100 years of age. But it's hard to imagine anyone having such an impression or such an influence over shaping foreign policy of any country that man had.
Well, any time the name Kissinger comes up, I remember how Hollywood used to try and deal with him in the 1960s. The film Dr. Strangelove. They didn't really understand Kissinger then was a German refugee and a Jew. Yeah. And so Dr. Strangelove was done by Peter Sellers as a Nazi. And then in the film Failsafe a couple of years later, or around about the same time, there is a fellow by the name of Grota Scheller, who by now is more Kissinger-like, who was part of the Failsafe film. And Kissinger went on beyond Hollywood, beyond their interest there, to open up communications with China, which I think was absolutely vital at that time. He eventually extricated, I'm sorry to say, the United States out of Vietnam and went on to be a very great fellow for many years who gave advice, good advice, to large numbers of people.
Apparently he was advising the White House really right up until the end. He undertook a trip to China in the last few months. He'd written a book. And it's hard to imagine at that age anyone remaining as active as that. And apparently he had a really attractive persona for women. Did you ever hear any of those stories?
No, I don't know any more about than that, but I do know that a number of people who have met him, people I've known through politics that met him there, said that he was always a very engaging personality. I think he was larger than life, and I suspect that he left for the want of better words, a thumbprint on United States politics in the last 50 years or longer.
Yes.
That will be recorded in future historians by historians of this particular period. Certainly his greatest achievement was the opening of relations with China and bringing China back into the normal country relations in the UN. And at the same time, we were doing it with the Whitlam government. I note that tomorrow is the 51st anniversary of the Whitlam government. And although the Whitlam government was in many respects chaotic, and it came about at the time of the collapse of the post-World War II boom, but at the end of it there, though, we recognised China as well.
What are your recollections of the Khemlani affair? Was it so that Jim Cairns and Gough Whitlam, and I think Rex Connor was involved too, were they trying to buy back the farm? They were trying to borrow money, $4 billion, I think it was, wasn't it? What do you remember?
It was something like that, $4 or $5 billion. And as I understand it, Khemlani was introduced to Rex Connor by a friend of mine and probably a fellow you would know, a great South Australian here, Jerry Cordeaux.
Oh, yes, indeed. I know him well,
and Jerry has he was called up before a Senate committee, and the then President of the Senate gave him some sort of knick-knack or something, I think cufflinks or something like that, to celebrate his day there, when he answered questions very well. And in fact, when they asked a question that Jerry didn't want to answer, he just said, "I'm just a poor new Australian, what would I know?" And made fools out of all of those who tried to pillory him. Yeah. But no, look, Rex Connor had the ambition, the great idea of buying the farm back. There was also proposals there to do other things too, to get into the nuclear industry. There were proposals there to talk about reprocessing in Australia, which is something that I push for and still believe very strongly in. But nothing as much as that happened now, but I suspect it will soon.
Nobody bothered to check Khemlani that he wasn't that he was the real deal. He was just walking around with $4 billion waiting to find a good home for it.
Well, I think that's right, but I suspect he was also in connection with Saddam Hussein and some of those people who had a bit more money over there than.
So he was a Mr. Fix-It. He was going to raise the money.
I believe he was more of a go-between than somebody who had the money.
Yeah.
But the Whitlam years were interesting. We normalised our relations with China, even though China, as is now, was still our main trading partner.
Yes.
So even though we didn't recognise them, China was still buying large amounts of Australian product and probably back the other way. The Whitlam government had spent 23 years in the wilderness, and it had a series of ministers. You mentioned Jim Cairns, who had programs that they wanted to bring in. They wanted to bring them in too quick, too soon. The world around them was collapsing. The post-war boom that we'd all suffered or had done well out of in the 60s and the early 70s ended. Unemployment went beyond 1 point whatever percent in 1973, 74.
Yes.
And now if we get unemployment down to about 4 or 5%, we think we're doing well. In those days, that would have been dreadful. In fact, I think in the 1975, unemployment went up to about 3.5 or 4%. And that was enough to make sure that Whitlam was well and truly defeated. And, of course, you had the oil shock at that stage, the Yom Kippur War. Again, Middle East politics have had a lot to do with these sorts of things. And when the price of oil went up, we had an oil shock, not so much in Australia, but in the rest of the world.
Who do you reckon has been the best Prime Minister of Australia?
Oh, I would have to say Bob Hawke was the greatest. He had a wonderful touch, and my dealings with him were great. One of my great memories is that when I married Davina, my wife, she had a little boy, 7, Alex, and I was just an ordinary staffer working for a politician that probably not many people had ever heard of. And
who was that?
Dominic Foreman.
Oh, Dominic Foreman. Yes, I've heard of
Dominic and I got on great, and I gave him a little note and said, when you go into caucus today, will you hand this to Hawkey? And the note was, could you come out and meet my wife-to-be and Alex? And question time finished, and Hawkey came out to the designated spot with a staff member there, and he's reading the note quickly to get the names because you have to remember who I was, never mind who Alex was going to be. And he came out and he spent time with him, and he then gave Alex a $20 note to go and buy himself a souvenir from Canberra. Yeah. And when Bob died, Alex, who's now a young man in his 40s now, but when Bob died, he was in his late 30s, put a black armband on.
Oh, yes, he makes an impression. He's a star, was a star. He had a common touch. He could mix with anybody, but he always made you feel like you were the centre of attention or the most important person in the room. It's a rare thing.
He was not full of himself. And the other thing I'd say is that Keating got credit, as he should, for a number of the economic reforms that came through.
I think he's a cold fish.
You must remember in the 1980s and 1990s, there was a solid economic reform that went through this country, the floating of the currency. Could you imagine what it would be like today if we didn't have that? Or we would be paying $75,000 or $80,000 for a little Korean car that we can now go and buy for $15,000 or $20,000. And the man behind all that
wouldn't it be better if we were making? Wouldn't it be better if we were making the cars here?
I think that is absolutely correct. There is a problem, though, that there's now 26 million people in this country, and you really need a throughput of about 3 or 4 million on a production line to be able to make something which is competitive. For many years, of course, the trade unions, and this is where Hawke again was a great man, the trade unions demanded, as did the National Party, that we have very high tariff walls. They were as high as 70 and 80%. and they were dismantled progressively through that. And we remember the Button program or all that. But the reality is it was Hawke that was pushing all this. It was Hawke that could see that the future of the country lay elsewhere. Now, it would be better if we had manufacturing here. I well remember when I first came to South Australia as a kid that my father got a job working for several engineering firms on Port Road. Otis Elevators were there, Forward and Downs, Simpson Pope, and out in Elizabeth, all the enterprises there, as well as Kelvinator and all those companies. Unfortunately, they've all gone because there is an economy of scale which unfortunately militates against a small population in Australia and an even smaller population in South Australia.
What's the advice that you would give to the Prime Minister, Albanese? What would you? What would? If you're sitting there watching television at night, I asked you a little while ago whether we were well governed, and you said no. It must get your goat every once in a while when you see something going wrong or something being done badly. Do you find yourself screaming at the television set, offering advice?
Well, my wife says so. She will confirm that.
I'd love to know. I'd like to be a fly on the wall.
I mean, look, a lot of the Albanese has had a reasonable run for the first, however, for most of the 18 months or so that he has been Prime Minister.
Yes.
There were a few own goals. I suspect when he didn't split the referendum question, that was it was always going to be a task too hard. And I well remember telling people at the time, and I remember I meet a group of guys on a Saturday morning for coffee, and I was talking about it there, and somebody at another table was going to punch me out. And that was because I was saying then I didn't think it was going to get up and it wasn't going to work. And that incident I've thought about much, not because he didn't punch me out, which I was quite grateful of, but I thought it has brought a division in this country that I have not seen since Vietnam.
No, I agree with you totally.
And
why do you think the Prime Minister was so wedded to it? He seemed to me to be prepared to die in a ditch.
Well, I understand that what happened was that wiser heads had said that this could be a problem and that it should be split. And as I understand it, a delegation was sent to speak to various of the Aboriginal leaders who made it crystal clear it was one question or none. And the Prime Minister decided he would go with that, and the rest is history. The other things, of course, that have happened since then have been, again, things that have hurt the government, not necessarily entirely of their own fault. The present situation where the all of the internment or internees are let loose out there, courtesy of the High Court, and I'm not criticising the High Court. I suspect that one of the few times you'll ever have me say I think the Greens actually had a point in Parliament when they said if a person is prosecuted, jailed, serves the time, and then is out in the community, then that should be the end of that matter. Now, in many respects, I have some sympathy with that, not with the child molesters or the murderers or any of those sorts of people, but in essence, we can't lock people up forever. Now, this was, some would say, a ticking time bomb for the government that they didn't handle very well. And in many respects, they're a bit like the rabbit with the spotlight on now. The other thing is the war in the Middle East has brought about stuff that I, as a former history teacher myself, I thought I would never see. I never thought I would see anti-Semitism
I agree.
rise, particularly in Australia and in Britain and in the United States and other countries. I well remember that there were acts of parliament put through in the 70s and 80s to make Holocaust denial an offence. And the reason for that was that people thought at that time that we would never believe that these things could possibly have happened.
Yeah.
So we wanted to make them illegal. Well, in actual fact, the opposite has happened. Anti-Semitism has reared its ugly head. And I think the episode yesterday or the day before in whatever hotel it was in Melbourne, where the family of people who'd been taken hostage on October the 7th were harangued by pro-Palestinians. I think that is the lowest point I've seen in my time in Australia.
Do you think it's dangerous?
I don't think it's dangerous here because the situation in Germany in the 20s and 30s, which isn't realised, is that World War I never really finished. It was an armistice.
Yeah.
Germany was not occupied. Germany still had some issues to raise, and unfortunately they were going to surface through there. And anti-Semitism in Germany, as in many other countries, including I am predominantly of Irish stock, and I know there was some elements of that. I can say it now. My dear old grandfather, who I love dearly, used to have a Guinness every night because he said he knew how Hitler to deal with the Jews. And it was not unusual in countries in Europe and in Western Europe as well, where anti-Semitism was very strong.
Yeah.
Sadly, of course, in Germany, it went out of control under the Nazis. And again, I thought, as did a lot of other people in the 70s and 80s, that people will not believe that these things have happened.
Yeah.
I took my wife to one of the camps when we were in Germany on a trip, and I said to her, look, I'll sit outside. We went out there, and she went through the museum and saw the Holocaust stuff there, as I had done some 40 years earlier at Dakar when I'd visited Europe. And I thought people wouldn't believe that this stuff wouldn't happen. Well, in actual fact, it's gone the other way. It's resurfacing. But I don't think, Jeremy, it's going to get very far, and I don't think it will go the same way. At least I hope it won't.
John Quirke is my special guest, used to the corridors of power. Most interesting to talk to you. Talking about the Prime Minister, I mean, do Prime Ministers, I know they have advisors and consultants and head of staff and all the rest of it. Do Prime Ministers take advice? Can you give a Prime Minister advice?
I suspect some do and some don't. And I would think that, most people like advice which reinforces their own particular narrative.
Yes, yes.
And I suspect what happened with Prime Minister Albanese, particularly on the question of recognition of First Nations people in Australia, that he generally would probably have accepted the advice of people that agreed with him. But he did look towards the end, particularly in the last 2 or 3 weeks before it, where the wheels were really falling off the cart of this. And the news poll was making it clear that it wasn't going to get up, that he looked as if maybe I shouldn't have got into this road, but politics, in many ways, is a one-way street, and you get in it, and it's very hard to turn around.
He's got about half the term to go, about another 18 months. What's the advice that you'd give him if he wanted to win the next election?
Well, I think there's been a lot of successes in this government, even though they don't get much publicity for it. One of those is a homegrown fellow in South Australia, Don Farrell has done a marvellous job in getting more of our product in overseas destinations, including in China. Yeah. And he's quietly worked behind the scene and has done very well on that.
Yeah.
There are others who've made some successes there. I suspect Jason Clare, as the Federal Minister for Education, has done a reasonably good job there. I suspect that the next 18 months, you never know when another October 7 or something might surface. You can never see what's in front of you. You can only govern for everyone there. And I did note this week that the inflation figures, there were all sorts of pundits on television saying that it will come in probably at 5.2%. Yeah. And there were others who said, no, that's a bit soon. But it came in at 4.9%. Mm. And so I can say that I think that things are on the right track there. I did say to my wife when I heard that figure that that's the end of rate rises, at least for now, and I suspect probably there.
So you'd agree with Bill Clinton and when he said it's the economy, stupid?
Oh, absolutely. Whilst you, as a member of Parliament, you get all sorts of issues from the local school or all the rest of it coming there, it's the economy at the end of the day that makes the difference. It was the economy that killed Gough and his team in 1975, some of which were possibly his own fault, but a lot of it was also international at the time. Almost every government in the Western world changed in that period from 74 through to 76 and 77. The next 18 months, I think the signs are that the economy probably is going to be all right, that we are going to be able to achieve possibly unemployment not going up as high as some of the pundits have said it needs to go up to deal with inflation, that we can keep it round about 4%, which, Jeremy, for all of our kids, I've got 4 sons and I like them employed.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. You would have made a very good Prime Minister or a very good Premier. Would you rather have persevered with your political career and gone to the top?
Well, that's very nice of you to say that.
Or you're having more fun now?
Oh, I have a lot more fun now. I enjoyed my time there. I enjoyed my time in Canberra. I enjoyed my time in state politics. I enjoyed working for Dominic Foreman. I was given a job there. Dominic employed me on the advice of a fellow by the name of Mick Young, who you might remember.
Oh, indeed, I do remember Mick Young.
Mick was a great friend and saw in me the ability to sort a few other problems out in the ALP, which is how I got the job, and I enjoyed it. And for me, it was a career change because I had been a history teacher before that and had done that for nearly 15 years.
Well, you're a wonderful friend and I really admire you, and I thank you for coming in here and talking to us at the table, and I hope you have a lovely weekend.
Thank you for the opportunity, Jeremy.
And have a wonderful Christmas.
The same to you, mate, and have a happy Proclamation Day too.
Yes, indeed.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.